record.
I was just listening to your podcast there, Bonnie.
I don't know if it's actually a podcast. It's just me trying to get used to the audio. But thank you.
It's the makings of a podcast. I like
it. Yeah, it's fun.
I like it.
It's fun.
Yeah.
I think I missed what Bonnie did, so can you please fill me in?
Well, I get a lot of questions that really aren't related to what I'm working on right now. So I thought that what I would do is just take like 10 minutes, and record an audio of it and then send it out. I send it out through Substack, and then I share the little links to things that aren't locked down for just subscribers. Does that make sense?
Yes, it totally does. I have been, doing some of that with videos and other things to try and, because it's sort of fun to explain things, but I also don't want to take the time to write something.
Yeah, that's why.
But I want to share the information.
Yeah, I usually do the podcasting, the audio stuff is so easy for me to do. When I have to do a video, it requires lipstick and hair that's going, reasonably well. So I have hair for audio, I should say.
I understand. My husband has commented that he appreciates it on days when he knows that I'm making videos. He's like, wow. But yes, the hair struggles are real.
I mean, it's not a struggle. For me, it's genetic. I just have really curly hair. So
You do. You have beautiful hair. You have beautiful hair.
Sweetheart.
No, it is beautiful, but hair can be a challenge.
Could you hear my husband in the background? He's in the kitchen making lunch. He goes, yeah, she does.
Yeah. Why are we talking about hair? I mean, that's for those that are phallically challenged, it's a little difficult to hear this conversation.
It sounded like you said something else, but I know what you meant, so we'll just leave it at that.
I am not challenged for hair at all. I had to get a haircut yesterday because it's just way too much up there, and I'm 58, so I've got the good genes. I've got the good genes.
Well, we are at the top of the hour, so just want to thank everyone for coming to Geospatial Connections. We think that this conversation is being recorded. It might not be, so, but just to be aware that what you say, we hope, is maybe being recorded. But this is a time where we come together Wednesdays at this time on Clubhouse to have a conversation about things geospatial. I am really grateful for this group in terms of the conversations that we get to have and the community that we are building. This was a topic that was actually submitted by Adam, who is here today. So I'm really thankful. Well, we changed it slightly, but grateful for people who submit topics for us to discuss. So we will be discussing how should we define success for GIS, but would love to have the other moderators say something.
Well, I mean, for me, it's because I work for myself. It doesn't take much for me to throw out a woohoo. And I had shared on social media about, like, I had this kernel issue with, if anyone, I'll just give a quick thing about what that is in case people don't know. But Jupyter Notebook, as you know, if you're familiar with it, works with Julia, Python, and R, which is how the name's derived, Jupyter. It's not really...
Oh my goodness. Thank you for explaining that. I thought it was just out of this world. Haha.
You stop thinking, I feel like it should just work with Python, but it doesn't. So the communication bridge between Python and your Jupyter Notebook is that kernel, and mine disappeared. And I'm, writing a book, I have deadlines, and I could not get it back for longer than it should have taken. And I would share the solution. I was going to put it in the book, like how I solved it, but I don't know how I solved it because I threw so much at it that it appeared that I fixed it with one thing, but I don't know if that was it. It required some code, some, just changing environments in the terminal, probably too technical for people that don't do this every day. But I have to tell you, it's almost like once I fixed it, everything I tried to do up to that point just worked. I mean, I have like 4 or 5 different kernels now in my Jupyter notebook, depending on what environment I'm working in my terminal. So that was my big success for like the other day, and yay me. I'm Bonnie and I'm done talking.
No, I think that's great. So you would define success for GIS as stuff working.
Yeah.
Is that sort of a base level definition?
For me, I mean, there's bigger, larger scale, but sometimes when you just get down to that granular level, it's one small thing, like a stupid kernel, that could undermine your day. And, I learned so much in the process that I wasn't even mad, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Tim, I'm curious, how do you define success as our not GIS but GIS person?
Well, mine's a little more philosophical. What
I'm shocked.
My definition of GIS success is where people are using GIS and don't even know it. Where it's not a bridge that they have to cross. Like, we need to go talk to the GIS people to do this. It just is. And this kind of happened on accident. We built our approach, years ago was to go web GIS instead of trying to populate all of our departments with, an application. And we just had it out there. We didn't really sell it as such. And then when the web GIS would go down, we'd get calls from departments that I had no idea knew what GIS was. They're like, "Hey, this thing needs to work because we use it in JP1, or this thing needs to work because we need it in engineering." I'm like, awesome. So to me, that is kind of what I feel is success, is that we've spread GIS throughout, and people don't even realize it is. They just had to find out who to call to get it turned back on, and they're usually the first ones to tell me if there's an outage. So that's what I think is a good success of GIS. They use it daily. And I'm done.
Okay, I like that. I really like that, Tim, because most of the time when I speak publicly or I have to make a presentation, I don't break it down into, now I'm going to be talking about GIS. I'm working on I think I mentioned it, this thing for a medical college where I am not even using GIS. I'm just trying to show them that how they can add different information to their medical record system about the areas that they serve, the clinic locations, who are these people in these locations, how far they're traveling, all of that sort of thing and more, but without telling them it's geospatial. And then when we start having these conversations and they're wowed, and you tell them that, well, I did this with all open source, but obviously if it has to be secure, they're not going to want to go with open source. But I like them to know that I didn't share something with them that's out of their purview, or that's going to cost, they don't have to install a big, stack or do anything that's going to be a big outlay of money until they really can prove the value, which we talked about previously, of any type of investment in this. So thanks for reminding me of that, Tim.
No problem.
Right, well, Bruce is our sales dude, our sales bro, the person who's out there selling this all the time. I'm really curious about how you think about it.
I love it how you call me the sales bro. That is funny. That's really funny. Well,
the value. Wait, what do you call it? We need a new title for that. I hate
it's funny. Let's keep it because it's funny. Anyway, before I talk, I'd like to encourage Adam to raise his hand and come up and just maybe explain a little bit what you think, because I think that would be interesting to hear what you think GIS success is. For me, obviously, since I'm selling GIS services day in and day out, it's really neat for me to see the lights come on. Like when I'm with somebody and we start talking about outcomes, we start talking about problems that they can solve, or analytics that they can formulate, or workflows that they can geo-enable, or whatever it is, and then you start to see the lights come on, and you can kind of see them get kind of jazzed up and excited because they can see the possibilities, things that they've never thought of before. And I know that most of the time when we're talking about, like Bonnie's talking about a specific GIS problem set that she's working on. But for me, it's just that the generalist who's looking at the landscape and saying, I've got all of these business problems I've got to take care of. And then when they start to see where they can apply spatial resolution, it's really exciting and really fun, because then they have this back and forth, and it's really fun to see. So for me, GIS success is when people are able to see business outcomes from applying spatial methods. I like that.
I think that's a really great definition, one that's broad, because I think so when Adam originally posed this, I think the question was enterprise GIS, and so I think Bruce, you're working oftentimes with like larger implementations, as opposed to somebody getting like a single license of QGIS or ArcGIS on their computer. But I think what it doesn't, right, the scale may matter, but really it's is this actually improving things and making things better? But Adam, would really love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, thanks for allowing me to be a part of this, and thanks for accepting my suggestion for a topic. So, I came across this a while ago, and I started to think about it, and I think that a lot of us go to work and do our job every day and don't even think about whether or not we are successful in what we're doing and how you define success. And so it was a while ago that I ran across this. I don't remember where, but I'm like, wow, it's really important to, if we're going to judge ourselves and our work and how effective we are, we need to be able to define success. And so you can't measure success if you don't define it first. And so I thought it was a really interesting, and it can be definitely philosophical, Tim, so I'm with you there. But I think there's obviously multiple ways to define it. But I get a lot of people that ask me, how can I, show the value, or how can I prove that, GIS is supporting my organization? And so I normally deal with large enterprise implementations. And so I think there is a good one, like Tim mentioned, that, if you do embed GIS into the business of your organization, like, is GIS really mission critical? Like, if you shut GIS down, like, can people still work? And if the answer is no, the majority of people cannot get their work done and the organization can't function, then I think that would be success. And I think a lot of people also look at success as a synonym for ROI. So how much money are we saving, or how much time are we saving? And that's one way to look at it. But I get other people to say, oh, well, what are the metrics, or what are the key performance indicators that I can use to see if I'm successful? Is it number of layers that I maintain? Is it total number of data edits, data maintenance edits, in a year? Or is it the number of views, or is it the number of maps that are printed or exported, or the visitors to the site, or the users of the app? It's all of those things. But to me, first of all, not all value can be calculated with $1 or a minutes saved, because especially if you look at the COVID response, look at the Johns Hopkins dashboard, which I brought up last week. What's the ROI of that? Nobody knows, but we know it's really valuable, and that the data service behind that's near real time, that's pulling all this data from multiple sources together, it's hugely valuable. So the way that I define success is that if you're delivering value to your organization, or to your customer, or to your user, and that they recognize it. Because if you're delivering value but nobody knows it, then it's not very useful, because nobody knows you're providing this value, and so therefore you wouldn't get more resources, or more pay, or what have you. So I think that I define success, and this could be for anything, not just GIS, as recognized value. Are you providing recognized value to your end users, your customers, your colleagues, your organization? And that could come in multiple forms. Adam, I'm done talking.
Oh, I love that example. So I just wrote that down. Success is delivering value and the customer realizing it. And I think this is actually sort of, as we talk, both about the actual GIS side of things, but also like the professional side of things about advancing in your career, it's making sure that people recognize the impact that you're having. And so this is not to say that you should be obnoxious, but you need to make it like if you're just sort of a shadow, right? People may not fully recognize the value that you bring, and if you're just like doing excellent work, most of the time people probably know that, but I think that there's that last part about a customer realizing it is really important. So I'm curious, like Tim, you gave an example about ways that you got the feedback that customers were realizing the value, but I guess how do we make sure that our customers are realizing the value as opposed to maybe using something but not quite realizing the value? Does that question make sense?
No, and I have an answer. I mean, it's really delight is the only true metric. And and again, it's difficult to measure other than they keep asking you to do stuff. If you've solved a problem, and if you've, for any GIS folks out there, or anybody in any career, you need to make sure that you're useful, right? I mean, if others deem you useful, then you have an advantage to then solve other problems. So that's the first thing is you've got to do something, maybe some, like you say, a passion project, Juliana, or something that actually was useful to others. And then now you have, you've kind of, you're worth your weight, right? Now you can go in and do other types of things like that. So when your customers, and I have an advantage because my customers are in the same building I'm in, generally. So I can get feedback directly from them. Some others that are selling product and other things like that, they have to measure by other, less distinct ways, like, profit and things like that. But, to be able to hear from your customers, say, I really like that, can you give me more? Then right? Then you're a success.
That's a great point, Tim. And, where I'm going with this is we need to get recognition for the value we're providing so that we can, because I talk to a lot of, GIS users that work in enterprise environments, and they're always complaining, I'm too busy, I don't have enough hardware, I don't have enough software, I don't have enough this, I don't have enough that. And I'm like, well, it's great that you're busy, and it's great that you're doing a lot of great work, but if people knew, if you were being recognized and you were creating enough value, you wouldn't have those other problems because you would get more resources. So if your budget goes up every year because you're providing more and more value, that's success. And so where I'm going with this is not only do we need to define success, but we need to make sure that we're documenting the success, the value that we're providing. And then we need to communicate that so that people at the top know. Because, in times like COVID, there's people at the top of the organizations that are looking for ways to do more with less and to digitally transform their organization and get rid of manual paper-based workflows and save money. Well, GIS can do all of those things, but normally that's not in their head. And so we've got to make sure that as professionals, we're documenting the value we're providing, and then we're communicating that out. So every GIS person should be communicating to their customers, users, leaders at least once a year and saying, here, this is a summary of the year in GIS at our organization or what have you that says we accomplished the following things and we're going to plan on doing this next year, so that people are aware, so that when you do need more help or hardware or software and you go to ask for it, they go, oh, I know all the great value you're providing. Sure, I can do that because I understand and you're working on stuff that matters to me. So the other part of this is that you've got to align your work with the people that control the resources. They care about certain things and they're trying to accomplish things. And if you help them do that, then they're more likely to shed some resources your way.
Now, I always feel like I have to be And I love all that, Adam. I love all the enterprise stuff, but I feel like the enterprise stuff um, is a little different than like when you're on the other side, when you're like the small little shop, or the little guy that pretty much works independently. And I like to just add that perspective because I don't know if there's people in and out of the room that work the way I do. But the way I had to do it was like when I first started working in data science, I had to work the whole stack. I couldn't specialize. I didn't know where my value was. I just knew my value was being able to analyze data and to do it in a way that when I communicate with people, they can understand what I'm talking about and what I'm saying. And then once I learned all the skills up and down the stack, I realized where my value was when I recognized what my unique skill was. And, a lot of times you hear, jack of all trades, master of none. And people are like, well, no, what should I do? How do I work in GIS? And nobody pays attention to the rest of the quote. So the rest of the quote is like jack of all trades, master of none, but oftentimes better than a master of one. So that tells you that, we've all been kind of tricked into thinking that learning a bunch of skills is self-defeating. But if you listen to the rest of the quote, true value can come from learning a lot, right? Up and down a stack, for example, but then finding out where your successes are, where your value has been targeted, where you uniquely succeed. And that can be what you offer if you're like a small shop like me, or if you're trying to learn something in an enterprise situation and you want to learn new skills or move to a different department or have more responsibility in a different area. I'm Bonnie, and I'm done talking.
Yeah, Bonnie, I think that's hugely important. My world is enterprise, and yours isn't, and that's great. And there's certainly huge parts of the community that work in both. And I love hearing your perspective. And so the point, I think that's epical. What I'm getting to is that I don't think enough GIS professionals or geospatial professionals formally document the value provided at the end of their project, and then have that at the ready to communicate that to whoever. So if I'm a one-man shop or one-person shop and I've just completed a project, do you write that up with, here was the problem, here was the solution, here were the benefits realized, and here's a quote from my customer. So I have that on file so that if I run across another customer that I'm trying to gain more business from, I can quickly pull that out and go, oh yeah, well look here, this is what I did then. I think that we toil in this space that's hugely valuable, and nobody knows who we are and nobody knows the value we're providing. What I'm trying to do is energize the community to get them to, as a best practice by default, document the value and the benefits you're providing, and then tell the world about it so that people realize the power and value of geospatial.
I really agree with what you're saying, Adam. I'm really big into the power of a portfolio as being a visual representation of your work. And I think oftentimes if you are in a, whatever role where you're working for somebody else, you can struggle. People oftentimes struggle with, well, I can't create a portfolio because my work is client confidential or whatever. But there can be a real value in having that portfolio to be able to go internally within your organization to say, hey, I've done these sorts of problems before, as well as one of the best pieces of advice that I got early in my career was at the end of every month, spend 15 minutes writing down what you did so that you can have a better annual performance review. And so I think that there's some real value in having that record, that it could be really great for going externally, but that we often overlook just being able to communicate to others within your organization.
Yeah, well stated, Jen.
Adam, I really love the idea of just proactively putting out there for your organization or for your potential clients, what you've done in the past, what problems you've solved, what it's looked like, just really documenting it. And if for a GIS manager, for example, at a larger enterprise, they could even reach out to different organizations that they've served and said, give me a paragraph, say something about, what this has done for you this year, how this has affected your organization. But I really like the idea of being proactive about the wins and about what has gone on and what has gone right. I like that.
Yeah, I think it's important for us as a community to step up and be noticed and be appreciated for the value that we're providing and get some more respect and some more resources. And I think we're kind of off in the corner a lot of times and taken for granted, or not fully appreciated for the magic that we do.
Adam, help me out here. Pinellas County in Florida, who was the GIS manager there? He spoke at one of the Manager Open summits.
Yeah, that was a while ago. That was Brian Zumwalt.
Yes, and he said, now this applies to those that are in the enterprise arena and those like Bonnie, right? I think that if you're in your office, then you're not doing your job. You need to get out there and kind of sell the work. So I would think keynoters like Bonnie and you're using geospatial as sort of this special sauce to shows like, here's all this data, now here's another way to look at it. What you're doing is introducing people, the audience, not that it's GIS or it's just another way, a real eye candy way to see and make the data sing to you. And I think when we, like for me in local government, going around to different departments to kind of sell what we do is important, because I've been in this biz for 30 years and nobody knows what we do. They still don't. And so they don't know to ask you some of the challenging work that you can do, that's purposeful, that you want to do. So then you're just left heads up digitizing new as-built, or just doing mundane work that has little value to the company. I mean, it's valuable because it needs to be done, but it's not like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you can do this. Every once in a while, you got to step out of that comfort zone and do one of those passion projects, or at least find out, here's what we do, here's what we could do, here's what I'm doing. Do you want me to do some of the could do stuff? That means that what I'm doing now is going to have to minimize if I'm only a one-person shop, but there will be greater value. You need to start having conversations like that with the folks, that pay the bills and things, and that's how I think you get more notoriety, and that's how I think GIS prevails.
And I'm sorry.
No, go, you go, Bonnie.
What I wanted to say is, like, when I'm like, this is going to be funny, and I won't get into the weeds with this. We can make it a topic for another session, but I'm working with a huge medical college. And I'm not just going to have a workshop. I'm leaving them with a semiotic framework so that they can build out their big data analytics. They can emphasize leveraging some of their larger data sets. And they've self-directed where the data needs to be, the type of data they need to collect. That's the gap I'm filling. But once I'm done with my part, they have a framework that they have to develop, bounded by epistemic and cultural context unique to their organization. So I don't just go in there, do the Bonnie show, cash my check, and go on to the next. I am building these big frameworks to leave behind. So I just wanted to add that. I'm Bonnie, and I'm done talking.
Yeah, Bonnie, I think that is really helpful context that you have, and definitely is very Bonnie on brand. Okay, well, I guess we've got Rin is up, and I don't see much of a bio for you, so maybe you can introduce yourself and tell us more about your thoughts on this.
Okay, my name's Brian Green, and no, I don't really have a bio on here because I'm not always on here for GIS matters, although I do listen into your conversations somewhat regularly. What I wanted to add is I worked at Esri for 14 years, and how Chris Thomas, who's the director of state and local government at Esri, got his position is he was basically a one-man GIS shop at the city of Ontario, and he took it upon himself to continuously and rigorously document the value that he was providing his organization, and that was the City of Ontario at the time, including doing an audit of the census to prove that the city was getting underfunded based on the information that the census had collected. And he was able to literally win the city $1 million of extra funding by doing that. So there have been books that have been published about the business cases of GIS that have gone really well to demonstrate, the real world impacts of GIS. Now, at my time at Esri, I spent tons of it focused on public safety because that was kind of the hot topic of the time, and that was at the start of when California started burning on a regular basis. And so I was working with fire departments across Southern California, inland Southern California specifically, on how to implement GIS to be effective for emergency management. And the savings that you find there is in the houses that didn't burn, and the acres that didn't burn, and the people who, I hate to say it, didn't die. I remember at the time there was a project based on the drought and the dying trees in the San Bernardino National Forest to remove as many dead trees as possible, as quickly as possible, before they all went up in flames. And Esri was deeply involved in that project because, well, frankly, Jack basically said, we're going to spend our time and money doing this because this is in our own backyard, in our own self-interest. And they found a lot of, possibly devastating consequences by building up models in things like grid in order to figure out, if this happens, this is how badly this will go. And if this happens, this is how badly this will go. And they had, at the time, some pretty, we'll call them interesting models about the potential loss of life that could happen if they didn't get ahead of the fires and things like that. And it led to what was a controversial evacuation order in 2003, one of those first fires. And they usually pull that trigger very quickly in the San Bernardino National Forest because the only ways to get out could easily get choked off. So those are a couple of the examples I think about. But the thing that I kind of want to leave with is it's very valuable to, try to, document those, and it's come up before, but document those real world impacts, whatever they look like, that will help the organization say, yes, we need to do more of this.
So I guess, out of curiosity, right? So that example for the San Bernardino Forest, there's obviously huge impacts. But if you are, GIS analyst one at county government, what do you think some of those wins would be?
I actually work with some entry-level GIS analysts who are trying to build their career, and improving, doing a study on walkability is something that a pretty early GIS analyst or somebody coming out of college could do. How do we improve an area? What are the underserved areas for a particular issue? Can you do a study on, especially important right now, I believe, is can you do a study on food deserts and the impact of zoning laws on food deserts? These are things that seniors in college can do, and sometimes are doing on their own. And those, again, can you get people to act upon the information? That's another challenge. But by at least showing that here is something we must address, and then putting math against, if we address this could be the real world impact. By providing more options, people will cook better for themselves. That will lower healthcare costs down the road. Are demonstrable impacts that I know, like I have a couple friends who teach GIS in college, have been able to get out of their students.
Yeah, okay. I was reading in a book recently that if you think about your salary, whatever that is, and then take into account administrative costs, health insurance, whatever, that you should a way that you can try and frame your argument about the benefit that you bring is to say, I provide 5 times my salary to the company because of just sort of what those other ancillary costs are. I mean, right, that works a lot better in terms of if you're winning work, if you're somebody like Bruce. But I also think that that's it can be a lot harder within the world of GIS. But if you begin to think about what some of those benefits are, or what it could cost to bring somebody else in to do some work, is another way that you can begin to frame those. But we do want to. Oh,
can I suggest also there's an incremental approach, and this is something that affects those who are doing transportation work. So, consider somebody who's just working to improve the data quality on roads, make sure that it has all of the relevant information that's necessary. Well, that seems boring and also boring. But the reality is of something like that has an additive effect with a team who are just doing the boring tasks of upgrading and maintaining data is, at the end of the day, those who are in charge are accountable for millions and billions of dollars of federal transportation funds. And for the past 10, 11 years, there had been funds allocated that have both a carrot and a stick. And the stick is that if you can't provide us the data and the decisions why you made the choices you made about where you put your money, or our money as the taxpayers, you could lose department autonomy. So one of the organizations I was working with a couple of years ago was at risk of losing their DOT's department autonomy for picking their own projects because they were unable to back up their choices.
Well, really quick, Brian, one of the things that I find with the government work is that we get too many people that do the analysis very far away from the people that decided what the focus of the organization or the project should be. And, I've had a lot of success when dropped into those sorts of situations by shrinking that, because then you don't get the boredom and you don't lose whatever it was that made somebody come along and fund your project, if that makes sense. So, like something with roads, for example, I do a lot of work with hydrology just because I'm really interested in impervious surfaces and flooding and where those floodings are happening, as far as underserved populations and all of that. So if I bubble all that up into a conversation, nobody's getting bored. And I feel like a good source, not to pivot too much, but a good source where we need to get the GIS information is, as a member of the National Press Club, I need to talk to my fellow journalists that aren't geospatial analysts and explain to them, say, like, why roads matter. For example, not to get political, I think I mentioned this last week, but why Manchin is against the infrastructure bill, when if you look at the data on the roads and the bridges, the publicly available data that is geocoded, that talks about West Virginia being the worst rated state. That is a job for a GIS person to communicate the importance of roads and infrastructure and how it can impact whether we get legislation we need that can improve the infrastructure, in the United States. So that's just a way of taking that little thread of a funded small little project that's struggling with putting it into the big culture and conversation that's happening right alongside it, where there's limited engagement and no one's making the connection. I'm Bonnie, and I'm done talking.
I love that, Bonnie. Brian, I think when you mentioned that some of those, whatever agency that was, where they were picking their own projects and they weren't showing the value to the company and lost autonomy, or possibly lost autonomy, there's one quick, simple solution to that. I'm all for staff, people, anyone picking their own projects to work on. I think the one step that just has to be made is collect those projects and then share those projects with management or administratives and go, please organize these or prioritize these in the way you want them done. It's visibility, and now they've given you clear and concise direction, and now you've got, let's say, a top 5 list, and now the team could pull from that top 5, and you know that you're providing value because somebody else has looked at it. So it's not just fun projects that you want to do, but now you're doing fun projects that your agency now has, in essence, approved. What do you think?
So Tim, let me expand on the problem a little bit, because the problem with this particular act, and actually, I'm sure within the new infrastructure package there will be something similar, if not more overarching, is within the legislation known as the FAST Act for transportation. It had a large allocation of money for agencies like DOTs across the country to improve their roads and bridges, etc., with the caveat that they had to use data, which often would rely on a GIS and civil engineering data paired with it to justify their decisions. They had to put together, why did you work on this road instead of this road? Why did you work on this bridge instead of this bridge? What objective factors did you use to get there? Now, they didn't do a lot in terms of framing out how they could come to the conclusions, but they had to be able to back every one of their decisions up, because I'm trying to remember, but a mile of roadway costs millions of dollars to build. So they wanted to be able to see, okay, you put your money to these projects, were they of good use? Now, the problem here was not they didn't have good decisions. The problem here is that because their data sucked, they couldn't prove their decisions. They couldn't justify their decisions with the data, and they had to go back and they had to rectify that and spend basically a year and a half back and forth with federal highways showing their work and showing their progress, so that they wouldn't wind up in a we're going to take over your project planning now situation.
Okay, thanks for adding that additional that additional context. Well, Toby, I see, is in the audience, and Toby runs GIS Success. So would love it if you wanted to come up on stage and talk about sort of how you define success, or anyone else. So Frank or Matt or Bob, I would love to have you add into the conversation. All right, we're bringing Frank on up, hopefully. There we go, Frank.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? I was having some audio troubles, but great to be here as always. I think for me, success in GIS is about when I'm working with my clients. It's really about how far have I progressed them, how much can they understand the entirety of what we're doing, not just pushing the GIS buttons, but understanding how it fits into their goals, into their mission. And I work with a lot of nonprofits and organizations that are very mission driven. So for me, success is when those folks can feel comfortable with the data sets, feel comfortable in talking about technology, and be able to push their organizations forward using the technology. I give this story a few times before, where I said one of the recent clients I've been working with, the Detroit People's Platform, my greatest moment during that whole campaign was when I was able to step back and hear the staff members, the community organizers talking about presenting the data, and how if they presented it one way, it might have been misleading, and they were just kind of going back and forth talking about the data, how it should be represented, and recognizing that they have a responsibility to their constituents when they're presenting that data. So for me, it's about pushing folks forward and helping them understand the tech realm as a whole and how it fits into their mission or their organization. That's what I define as success for my business or the groups that I work with.
So have you found that, and this is for Bonnie too, right, or anyone that's kind of brought in to help, do you find that really success is if others are enlightened, like they hired you in to do something, but you showed them something else, right? You kind of taught them how to fish, if you will, that this is, I came in to do these three things, but what I showed you is something that you can move forward, and maybe their mindset has changed. Have y'all had that?
Now, me personally, I've just started taking this different approach when working with my clients that, like I was alluding to before, where I leave them with an actual semiotic, like, platform with all their interdependencies that they have to map, and they have to figure this out while we're talking. It's sort of like a pre-work, so that when I go in there and I'm talking to them, they're actually thinking about fundamental changes they need. Because imagine, I feel this is fairly unique. I don't know anyone else doing it, but imagine if you have electronic health records where you have some information. You might have some addresses, you might know your outreach, you certainly know your outcomes, you know um, the sorts of variables that you're collecting, that you're reporting on. Now imagine, like I said before, if you actually understood geographically the where of all that data you're pulling in. So this clinic that's, an outlying clinic that, maybe is connected in some way to the main hospital setting, but their outcomes are quite different. The fact that you can actually go in there and look at the metadata and the attributes and figure out other things and show them to them. It doesn't mean that in this, 10-hour workshop I'm doing that I'm going to be, here's your solution, push this button and aren't you going to be successful? I often think with GIS, I'm actually showing them what they don't know. Because a lot of people think if they're looking at a map, it's GIS, but that map might just be a bunch of pixels. It might not have any metadata. It might not have any other data associated with it to tell you anything. So what I try to do is reveal all this with a framework they can build as we go, so they're left with a tool. So I feel like when I do that, and this is the biggest scale I've done it on, so we'll have to check back with November to see what the value add looks like. But I can only imagine that teaching people to look beyond the tip of their own nose, or this is how we've always done it, especially in medicine and healthcare, which is where I tend, where I work. I feel like there's only going to be a light at the end of this tunnel. I'm Bonnie, and I'm done talking.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Juliana. I don't
Uh,
know the topic of this. Hello.
yeah. So we're talking about how do you define success for GIS?
Well, I have a different question. Would like to ask, but it
Well,
is related to GIS only.
okay. So I think we try and keep things sort of on the subject that we have. So I think we've got Matt up on stage right now, and if to continue sort of this conversation about how we define success.
Yeah, thanks for the conversation. It's a good one. Some really interesting input here. I wonder. I listened to what Adam said, and I agreed in terms of how we define value, and it's this. It was a good definition of value, and it isn't this sort of one thing. And maybe what I'm going to say sets up another conversation in the future, but I do wonder why we continue to fail to share, and I know some of you guys have spoken about how we can better share the value that we provide, but historically we remain in the corner, unknown. We've had the conversations around why we sit in that place for a long time, but and again, I'm going to overstate fail, but it feels as though we're still having conversations around value and how we best get there, and we've been having these conversations for so many years now, and we still haven't really got there. And I've listened to folks who sort of stepped away from these sort of very specific conversations and had this wider talk about sort of a legacy perception of value. And sometimes, and I have never really had that fully defined in my own mind. I know what I think it might be, maybe just be the focus on maps. Is that the real value that we bring? And I don't think I think we'd all agree that's not our only focus point, but it is certainly very widely discussed. So my 2 points were, why do we continue to fail? And again, it may not be for this, it may be a future conversation. Do we have a legacy perception of value? And if we're looking at crossing, I really love the book Crossing the Chasm. How do we bring GIS to a wider audience? And we still have our own echo chamber, we still talk to one another, but the wider world doesn't know much about us, and yet we organise our world geographically, and the underlying data that is part of that world, our data, if you want to call it that, is all about how we organise ourselves as humans and the planet, etc. So we're hugely important, hugely undervalued. And I mean, one of the reasons I joined Critigen actually, and Bruce and I work together on this stuff, is some of the stuff we sort of focus on is geo-enabling business systems. So can we actually take stuff that's in SAP and some of these other business systems and sort of gently integrate GIS into those systems? So business folks are looking at data that's within the systems that they know, but there is this inherent geospatial aspect to the things that they're doing, the decisions they're making, the work that folks are doing. So, it may be that some of the work that we're doing is going to help that crossing the chasm, but I do still wonder, going back to my original thing I said at the start, was we still continue to have these round and round conversations about how we best get GIS wider, and we've been having these conversations for a long time. I wonder how we do actually truly cross that chasm. So this is Matt. I'll step.
So Matt, I think that's such a great topic of conversation, and I think one thing I've seen you post on LinkedIn about some is about Geospatial 2.0, and a thing that I've been thinking about a lot is we see the projections of geospatial as an industry really increasing, but I think in part that's because geospatial data and analysis has in certain ways been democratized, and the industry of GIS people is not necessarily adapting to the ways that the trends are going, as well as making it clear why having some basic knowledge of projections, some more advanced analysis could actually be helpful, or why having a spatial perspective is important beyond just doing buffers around stores. So I think that our industry has just really done a poor job of making that adaptation. But I'm curious what other people have to say.
And also, really quickly, the capability of the systems, like being able to look at petabytes of data, and have all this data, then people have to catch up with it from a skill perspective, that are outside the closed world of GIS. And I mean, I think you could be talking about data science in general when you say, why aren't people skilling up and valuing? Because people think like, oh, let Betty, who does my calendar for me, create a survey on the fly to gather this information. People seem to think that anyone can do it, whether or not they have the skills or not. Or, I think there was something that, I don't think it was Jack that said it, but somebody said, oh, it was the Think Spatially podcast. I don't remember the name of the guy who hosts it for Esri, but he was saying that, this is not a skill you can just pick up on the job any longer. This has got to be integrated in our middle schools, our elementary schools. It's got to be part of, learning along the whole trajectory of learning, so that we can bring in this skill set when we're looking at problems. I'm Bonnie, and I'm done talking.
I mean, I think that part of the reason why we're off to the side, why we keep having this conversation, is that we're not taught that this is part of our job. I've talked about this in the past. I mean, I think that most, especially the GIS manager position, is broken because the job description is set up for 10 or 15 years ago, when all the GIS was done by the GIS staff. And now, it's an enterprise system that can be used by anybody on any device, anywhere, at any time. So that's a different job role, but the job descriptions haven't been rewritten. And so if I'm a GIS manager, I don't know that I should be out there meeting executives and documenting the value and selling the value of GIS to them so that I get increased resources. And most GIS people in that role have backgrounds like mine in geography and urban and regional planning. So I think therein lies the rub, is that most of us in the geospatial community don't know how to do this stuff and don't even know that it's part of my job and I should be doing it. And so it's this long time realization of the community that, holy smokes, I need to be doing this stuff, and here's how and where I can learn about it. At least that's the way I view it.
Adam, I really, really agree with what you're trying to say. Oh, Toby just raised his hand. We have about 5 minutes left, but Toby would love to get your thoughts on this as a GISsuccess.com owner.
Hey everybody, I just wanted to join all the cool kids here. GIS success, that's a huge topic, and I've kind of seen how you guys are talking about it, and it kind of spreads the map, so to speak. But, the way I've kind of refined how success is as far as GIS goes within the organization, it's being able to change the mindsets of executives and staff so that it moves GIS's needle in the organization, to where GIS is being discussed and their concepts are being identified in projects and in ways to make things better without your input, without your context of pushing that agenda. If you can get to that point, I think you've been very successful. And, a lot of people, just like Adam was just saying, it's not in their job description to be a GIS marketer. It's not, your job description to really push GIS up through the ranks and be fully integrated with all kinds of business systems. That's inherent. Over time that you kind of figure this stuff out, and that's where GIS Success kind of stepped in and was like, what? There's a gap here where you run from GIS technician to becoming a GIS analyst, and then you cross that point of being a GIS supervisor and manager, and now there's a lot more expectations on things that need to happen, and there was no really good real world training to help those managers and those supervisors be able to talk to executives, be able to market GIS. And so, GISsuccess.com kind of came together with that to say, hey, you know what? There's a lot of people out there with, decades of experience to help, aid those to be able to address those issues in a much more efficient and ways of creating best practice. And so that's what we try to share with GISsuccess.com, is that, there are a lot of expectations for us to be successful, and there's a lot to be learned from those that have already done a lot of those successful tasks and those jobs. So that's what I would kind of define success. Be able to move the needle, get someone to go from point A to point B, even if it's a small step. All of that adds up over time. So this is Toby with GISsuccess.com, and I'm done talking.
Well, thank you, everyone, for sharing your perspectives as part of this conversation today. I'm grateful. I am definitely going to, take some things away in terms of how I communicate the value that I add, and I think I just got some really helpful language as I talk about that. And I wrote down that from Adam, success is delivering value and the customer realizing it. And to me, that's my big takeaway from today, is that the customer realizing it aspect of things. Bob, just we have about 3 minutes left, but do want to recognize that you are up here on stage, and so want to give you just a second if you want to add into to the definition to the conversation quickly.
No, I agree with Matt and Adam on a lot of things. I'm not a technical GIS. I'm not a GIS user, but I've learned GIS through what I do, and I think that's a measure of the success for GIS is having people like me learn it and teach it in my organization. And when I think there was a discussion about non-technical users employing GIS without knowing it, through the software they use, what Matt was talking about, I think that's success. But it looks different for probably every organization what success is, because I'm not a government, we're an architecture firm. Architects aren't traditionally trained to use GIS, but when they're employing it without knowing it, I think in my organization that is success for us. But we also have to do a lot of internal re-education on what projection systems are and stuff like that. So I think Adam's point about wrapping up what you've done successfully and giving quarterlies is super invaluable to get those resources allocated.
Hey Bob, I got one more question for you. How'd you? You're gonna have to explain that avatar you got there.
Oh, that's a funny meme about design. I can't remember what. If you Google it, it's a GIF, and it's about there's a guy standing behind some other guy's shoulder, and he's just moving a toilet left and right, and that's kind of like the story of design, just over the shoulder managers.
I thought it was like a Magritte statement on Magritte. Isn't he the one that had the toilet at the Taft Museum in London or something like that years ago? Is that sort of connected?
No, it's just a funny thing to see a toilet in 3D.
Well, with that, I do want to thank everyone for coming and being part of our conversation today. So next week we are going to be having a conversation about how to find a job within the world of geospatial, and I think the variety of backgrounds is actually really helpful. It's currently titled GIS, but I think it's really geospatial, a spatially enabled job. And so would love it if you came back and were part of that conversation. As always, you can go to our website, www.geospatialconnections.com, and give us suggestions for topics we should discuss. So anyway, thanks everyone.
Bye everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.